Beneath our feet lies a story older than memory, older than myth, older even than the words we use to tell it. It is written in stone and ash, in the bones of vanished beasts, and in the faintest scars left by rivers long dried. What if the earth you know is only the latest page in a book endlessly rewritten? What if time itself has folded and reset, scattering civilizations like leaves across forgotten epochs? The silence of the past is not empty. It hums with echoes, inviting us to listen, to wonder, to imagine what has been lost, and what still waits to be found. Before we step into this labyrinth of memory, if you find yourself moved by the mysteries of Earth's deep past, consider joining us on this journey. Share these stories, leave your thoughts, and subscribe so together we can keep unearthing the riddles that time has buried. The first stories of humankind did not begin with words, but with the crackle of fire. Against the immensity of the Paleolithic night, a small circle of flame became both shield and oracle, casting shadows of hunters and mothers across the walls of stone. Those walls bore the first imprints of imagination, ochre handprints pressed into the dark as if to say, "We were here. We endured." Survival was not a given, but a ceaseless negotiation with the elements, with predators, with the unrelenting hunger that stalked each dawn. The men and women of that deep time lived lives balanced on a knife edge, yet within their struggle lay the seeds of everything that would follow. They woke each morning to landscapes that were as dangerous as they were sublime. Herds of mammoth drifted across frost-laden plains, their silhouettes towering above the grasses as if sculpted from stone. Saber-toothed cats lay in wait beneath the cover of scrub, patient and silent, their presence a reminder that humankind was not yet master, but prey. Winds carried with them the scent of snow and the whisper of approaching storms. To live in such a world was to inhabit a perpetual state of awareness, ears straining for movement, eyes scanning horizons, fingers wrapped tightly around sharpened stone. Life was vigilance, and vigilance was survival. Hunger was the most constant companion. It was carved into the faces of children who had known too many nights without meat, into the wiry strength of hunters who carried their hunger like a second skin. When a kill was made, it was not celebration, but reprieve, a brief breath in the endless rhythm of scarcity. A mammoth could sustain a band for weeks, its fat precious beyond gold, its hide transformed into shelter against winds that cut to the bone. Yet the hunt was never certain. Spears shattered. Ice gave way beneath desperate feet. One miscalculation could scatter hunters across a plain, leaving behind only blood in the snow and silence where voices had been. Still, there was resilience. Fire became more than warmth. It became memory. Around its glow, stories were shaped not by language as we know it, but by gesture, song, and rhythm. The flick of a wrist could recall the thrust of a spear. The rise of a voice could mimic the roar of the hunt. These were not just tales, but instructions for survival encoded in art. The caves of Chauvet, Altamira, Lascaux. These galleries of light preserved not only images of bison and deer, but echoes of a world in which survival and imagination were indistinguishable. The animals were drawn larger than life not merely to record them, but to honor them, to weave them into the fabric of human endurance. The land itself was an adversary and a teacher. Glaciers advanced and retreated, sculpting valleys, carving rivers, sealing entire landscapes beneath walls of ice. To move with the seasons was not a choice, but a necessity. Bands of early Homo sapiens tracked the migrations of herds, following trails older than their own memory. They read the signs of earth and sky, the angle of the sun, the flocking of birds, the sudden bloom of plants after rain. Each clue became a map drawn not on parchment, but in instinct. They carried the weight of knowledge across generations, passing survival down like a torch kept alive against the winds of time. Yet in the darkness of hunger, there were sparks of tenderness. Bones buried carefully beneath mounds, flowers laid beside the fallen, pigments brushed gently across faces that would never wake again. These were gestures of meaning, proof that life was more than endurance. The Neanderthals did this too, their graves whispering of love and loss, their stone tools sharp as ours, their voices perhaps carrying melodies now lost. We were not alone in the Paleolithic night. We shared it with cousins whose shadows still linger in our blood. Their survival was also a struggle against hunger and cold, and in the brief overlap of our worlds, we borrowed from one another, blending traits, learning, passing on fragments of ourselves. The hunt shaped the body, but it was cooperation that shaped the mind. To bring down a beast, many times one's size required more than muscle. It demanded trust. One hunter driving prey toward another, spears flying in rhythm, voices calling in warning or triumph. The failure of one was the failure of all. The success of one was shared by every child in the circle of fire. In those moments, the bonds of survival deepened into something approaching kinship, the recognition that life itself was communal. From this necessity grew the roots of empathy, of planning, of culture. But always, the ash remained. Fires burned down to embers, leaving behind black scars on the earth that archaeologists now uncover like the fingerprints of time. In those ashes lie seeds of grass from meals long consumed, shards of bone split for marrow, flint chips scattered like stars. Each fragment whispers of meals eaten, dangers faced, victories won, and nights endured. To kneel in the dust of a Paleolithic hearth is to touch the pulse of survival itself, to recognize that beneath the monuments and machines of our age lies the same unyielding rhythm of hunger and flame. Even in scarcity, beauty emerged. Beads carved from bone, pendants shaped from teeth, patterns etched into stone, all carried meanings we can only guess at. Perhaps they were charms, prayers for the hunt. Perhaps they were simply adornments, the earliest glimmers of individuality. Whatever their purpose, they remind us that humanity did not wait for abundance to create. Art was not born from leisure, but from struggle, a refusal to let the harshness of existence erase the possibility of meaning. To decorate the body, to paint a wall, to sing into the night, these were acts of defiance against silence, gestures that claimed, "We endure and we dream." There is a strange tenderness in imagining that moment when an ancestor pressed a palm dipped in pigment against a cave wall, leaving behind a silhouette that still endures tens of thousands of years later. Was it pride? Was it ritual? Was it the simple act of wanting to leave a mark, to say even in hunger, "I was here"? That handprint, reaching across time, feels less like an artifact and more like a greeting, a reminder that survival was not merely physical, but spiritual. The rhythm of ash and hunger would define the first great expanse of human time, stretching for tens of millennia before the first seeds were sown in earth. It was a rhythm measured not in years but in seasons, not in dynasties, but in the cycles of ice and fire, kill and feast, storm and calm. And though hunger pressed hard, it forged resilience. Out of deprivation emerged ingenuity. Out of fear, fire. Out of struggle, story. The Paleolithic world was harsh, but it was also luminous, alive with voices learning to echo in stone, with flames carving the first memories into darkness. And so we begin where they began, in ash and hunger, in the shadows of beasts, in the silence of long winters broken only by the crack of bone and the cry of fire. This is the foundation upon which all else was built, the first chapter of a story that will stretch from caves to cities, from stone tools to cosmic mysteries. The question remains, as the flames fade and the night deepens, what did those ancestors dream of when the hunger eased, when the fire burned low, and when their eyes turned toward the stars? They could not yet name. Long before boundaries were drawn and maps carved meaning into lines, the earth itself was the only stage, shaping every possibility of human survival. To live in the deep past was to live at the mercy of landscapes in constant flux, seas that rose and fell like breathing lungs, forests that advanced like armies, deserts that crept forward grain by grain until entire valleys disappeared beneath silence. The land was not backdrop, but character, restless, unpredictable, and often merciless. To understand the story of our species, one must first understand the world that cradled it. The Pleistocene was an age of titans, ice sheets stretching like continents, advancing with a grinding patience that reshaped the face of the earth. Glaciers carved valleys into the bones of mountains, left behind boulders like the scattered dice of giants, and pressed rivers into new directions. Where once a fertile plain might have stretched toward the horizon, within centuries it could vanish beneath a mile of ice, forcing entire peoples to migrate or perish. These movements were not slow to the human heart. They were cataclysms, experienced in lifetimes, carried in memory, told in warnings passed from elder to child. Do not linger where the ice grows. Do not forget that the land itself can kill. Yet in these shifts lay opportunity. Retreating glaciers exposed raw earth, fertile and waiting. Rivers carried meltwater into valleys, feeding grasses that drew herds, and in turn, the hunters who followed them. Each transformation of the landscape forced humanity to adapt, to learn new routes, to build new shelters, to read the shifting sky as carefully as we now read words on a page. The land taught lessons in patience and humility, reminding those who walked it that permanence was an illusion. The earth could give, and just as easily, it could take away. Rivers were lifelines. They carved paths through continents, their courses shaping the earliest migrations. To follow a river was to follow water, food, shelter, and direction. The Nile, the Tigris, the Indus, the Yellow River, all would one day cradle civilizations. But long before villages rose along their banks, they were highways for wanderers. The sound of water rushing against stone became a compass, drawing families through forests and plains, guiding them from one season to the next. To lose a river was to lose life itself, and so its currents were revered, feared, and remembered. Forests, too, had their duality. They offered shelter from winds and predators, their canopy a shield against the cruel sun or blinding snow. They provided berries, roots, wood for fire and tools. But forests were also labyrinths, where vision failed and predators thrived in silence. To move beneath trees was to step into an ambush, every shadow concealing eyes that watched. The courage it took to cross such domains is almost unimaginable now, when their danger has been tamed by steel and light. For Paleolithic bands, forests were not just resources, they were trials, landscapes to be survived by instinct and caution. And then there were deserts, vast and unyielding, where the horizon shimmered with heat and water was memory rather than presence. The Sahara we know today, endless in its sands, once held lakes and grasslands where human footprints mingled with those of giraffes and elephants. Its transformation was gradual. a drying breath that turned green into dust. Those who lived along its edges were forced outward, seeking refuge in the Nile Valley or further beyond. In this way, the desert was both destroyer and creator, scattering populations, reshaping cultures, and reminding humanity that no paradise is eternal. The Holocene brought a different rhythm, a warming that lifted the burden of ice and gave rise to climates more stable, though never truly predictable. Forests thickened, seas crept higher, coastlines redrew themselves, islands emerged where once there had been plains, and land bridges, those fleeting corridors of connection, slipped beneath rising tides. The Bering Land Bridge, which once linked Asia to the Americas, disappeared beneath the waters, severing paths forever. To walk across such bridges was to gamble with time, for what was open in one generation could be lost in the next. The ocean claimed what it wished, and humanity was left to adapt to its whims. Each shift of the earth left scars, but it also left stories. Fossilized riverbeds traced migrations of herds. Layers of volcanic ash preserved moments of catastrophe. Caves sealed by rock slides froze paintings in perpetual twilight. To walk through these remnants today is to walk among memories of landscapes that no longer exist, to glimpse the worlds that our ancestors called home. They did not see Earth as we see it now, a map, a fixed globe. They saw it as an animal, alive, breathing, sometimes gentle, sometimes violent. The shape of the land also shaped the mind. Mountains rising into clouds were not merely obstacles, they were mysteries, barriers to be crossed or revered. To climb them was to test endurance, but to worship them was to acknowledge their permanence. Plains, wide and open, demanded different skills, the ability to track from afar, to communicate across distance, to read the smallest signs in grasses bent by wind. Every landscape called forth a different kind of intelligence, and those who adapted survived. Those who could not vanished, leaving behind only bones and broken tools for us to uncover. And beneath it all, the earth shifted invisibly. Tectonic plates groaned against one another, raising mountains, shattering plains, cracking the seabed open with fire. Earthquakes swallowed villages before villages even had names. Volcanoes erupted with a fury that must have seemed divine, painting skies red, blanketing fields in ash, turning day to night. For those who lived through it, such events could only be understood as the will of something greater. Myths of angry gods, of floods and fires, may well have been born from these terrors, encoded into memory so that generations would not forget. The land was not static, and neither were its lessons. To live in the deep past was to live in a constant dialogue with Earth's shifting face. Where water pooled, life gathered. Where forests spread, danger lurked. Where deserts advanced, resilience hardened. Where ice withdrew, opportunity blossomed. Humanity did not conquer these landscapes. It learned to move with them, to adapt, to bend without breaking. That adaptability became our greatest inheritance, the quiet skill that would one day allow us to shape the land in return. But in those early ages, the land still ruled. Every horizon carried uncertainty. Would the river flow next season, or would it dry to cracked clay? Would the glacier advance once more, or retreat beyond memory? Would the plains bloom with grasses, or burn under volcanic ash? These questions guided each step, each decision, each fragile settlement. For the first time, humans were not merely surviving day to day. They were beginning to notice patterns, to anticipate the rhythms of Earth itself. And in that noticing lay the seeds of something extraordinary, the birth of foresight, of planning, of knowledge passed deliberately forward. The shape of the land was not only a physical reality, but a canvas upon which the first myths were painted. Rivers became deities, mountains became homes of spirits, storms became voices of power. The earth itself was sacred, alive in ways both tangible and unseen. These beliefs were not distractions, but strategies for survival, ways of embedding memory into story so that no lesson would be forgotten. If the land was dangerous, then it was also divine. To honor it was to respect its power, and perhaps to seek its favor. And so humanity walked the shifting face of the earth, carving pathways through forests, tracing rivers to their mouths, crossing deserts and mountains with feet hardened by stone. Each landscape molded them, tested them, gave them tools they would carry forward. When we speak of human endurance, we speak not only of the body, but of this constant negotiation with the land itself, this dialogue between fragile flesh and vast terrain. The earth shaped us long before we learned to shape it in return. As the firelight faded in those first settlements, and as the stories of ash and hunger grew into something more enduring, the land continued its restless shifting. Rivers would swell, deserts would grow, mountains would crumble, and seas would rise again. Humanity could only follow, adjust, and dream of a permanence that the earth never promised. Yet, in that restless uncertainty lay the very force that carried our species forward. The land demanded resilience, and resilience became destiny. And so, we leave this chapter with the image of a band of wanderers standing at the edge of a valley newly carved by retreating ice, gazing down at fresh rivers and fertile plains. They cannot know that they stand on the threshold of a revolution. They cannot know that the decision to linger, to plant, to stay, will change the rhythm of existence forever. For now, they only know the land as it has always been, vast, unpredictable, alive. The story of humanity shifts when the decision is made not to move, but to stay. For tens of thousands of years, life had been dictated by the chase, following herds, fleeing storms, abandoning valleys when ice returned or rivers failed. Survival meant motion, and every footprint left behind was a temporary mark, destined to vanish beneath snow, sand, or the trampling of beasts. Yet somewhere along the edge of rivers, on plains where the soil was dark and generous, a radical thought emerged. What if we do not leave? What if we root ourselves in the land, just as the plants and the rivers do? This choice was not inevitable. It was a gamble born of hunger, patience, and the slow accumulation of observation. Those who had lived for generations on the margins of grasslands noticed the cycles of grain, how certain stalks returned year after year in places where seeds had fallen. They learned that what sprouted could be guided, coaxed, encouraged by human hands. In this discovery lay the first hints of agriculture, not yet the vast fields of later empires, but fragile experiments. A small patch of barley tended by women, a cluster of wheat sprouting in a sheltered valley. These were not grand revolutions at their birth. They were hesitant gestures, trial and error carried out by people who still hunted, still gathered, but who began to suspect that permanence was possible. With the seed came the hearth. Fire, once a wandering companion, grew roots of its own. No longer only a circle of flames carried from camp to camp, it became the center of dwellings, the anchor of early homes. Ash piled not as evidence of a single night's survival, but as testimony to continuity. The first hearths were surrounded by stones to hold heat, and beside them were stored seeds, dried meat, tools, and ornaments. What had once been scattered across landscapes now gathered into a center. The idea of home, fragile, uncertain, but enduring, was born in these circles of stone and ash. Settlements grew not from sudden inspiration, but from necessity. Hunting was dangerous, unreliable. The great herds moved unpredictably, and predators competed fiercely for the same prey. Agriculture promised a kind of stability, though it was costly. Fields demanded labor and protection. Drought could undo years of careful tending, but the promise of storing grain against famine, of feeding children through long winters, outweighed the risks. Slowly, step by step, bands of nomads became villagers, tied not only to one another, but to the soil beneath their feet. The landscapes of the Fertile Crescent, the valleys of the Indus and the Nile, the highlands of Anatolia, all became cradles for this experiment. Villages like Çatalhöyük, with its tightly clustered houses built wall to wall, revealed a new way of living. Here, rooftops served as streets, and doorways opened not outward but upward through ladders leading to the sky. Within these mud brick walls, generations were born and buried, their bones interred beneath floors, tying family and memory to the very structure of the home. To live in such a place was to carry the weight of ancestry beneath one's feet, to sense that life and death now circled around a permanent hearth. But permanence brought new challenges. When people stayed, the earth around them bore the strain. Fields grew, tired, demanding new techniques. Livestock, once hunted, were penned and domesticated, their bodies reshaped by human intent. Goats, sheep, cattle, and pigs became partners in survival, providing milk, wool, meat, and labor. Yet with them came disease, parasites, and new vulnerabilities. To live with animals was to live with their afflictions, to share their fates. Settlement bound humanity, not only to soil, but to other creatures, knitting together destinies in ways never before imagined. Communal life reshaped the mind as much as the land. In nomadic bands, disputes could be resolved by separation, one group splitting away, seeking new ground. In villages, such luxury was gone. Conflict required negotiation, rules, rituals, and eventually, authority. The first seeds of governance and religion sprouted alongside barley and wheat. Leaders were chosen, or emerged, to settle disputes, to guide planting, to oversee rituals that ensured fertility and warded off famine. Shamans became priests, stories became doctrines, and the invisible bonds of belief grew as strong as the walls of stone. Walls themselves marked a profound transformation. Where once humans relied on distance and movement for safety, now they built barriers. The first walls were not the fortifications of kings, but simple enclosures, mud and stone piled to mark boundaries, to keep animals in and threats out. Yet they carried meaning beyond their function. A wall declared, "This place is ours. This soil belongs to us. This hearth is protected." With such claims came both security and rivalry. To defend one's settlement was to risk blood, and the first skirmishes between communities likely erupted not from conquest, but from hunger and territory. Even as settlements spread, not all chose to stay. For every village that took root, there were bands who refused the weight of permanence, who continued to roam, to hunt, to live as their ancestors had. The world for a time became a patchwork, villages rising beside riverbanks, nomads drifting across plains, herders guiding flocks through mountains. Each path carried its own wisdom, its own dangers. Yet the tide of history leaned toward settlement, drawn by the promise of abundance and memory. The soil was seductive, offering not just sustenance, but legacy. To plant a seed was to bind oneself to tomorrow. The rhythm of life changed with this binding. The seasons became rulers, each demanding obedience. Planting, tending, harvesting, storing. These cycles replaced the endless wanderings of old. festivals arose, marking solstices, rains, harvests, births. Time itself shifted from the unpredictability of the hunt to the measured cadence of agriculture. Humanity began to live not in reaction to the land, but in dialogue with it, shaping it, anticipating it, forcing it to yield. The earth that had once dictated survival now entered into negotiation, though never as an equal. Yet permanence carried a cost of the spirit. To settle was to accept vulnerability to catastrophe on a scale nomads had never faced. Floods could sweep away entire harvests. Plagues could spread swiftly through crowded dwellings. Fire could reduce villages to ash in a single night. In staying, humanity gained stability but also fragility, tethered to soil and circumstance in ways their ancestors could not have imagined. The very walls that protected them also confined them, binding them to a fate inseparable from place. Still, the imagination expanded within these walls. Pottery emerged, vessels shaped by hands that no longer needed to carry possessions across endless distances. Art grew more elaborate, freed from the urgency of survival. Figurines of women with exaggerated features, often interpreted as symbols of fertility, were crafted and placed within homes, suggesting a belief in continuity, abundance, renewal. Music, too, may have deepened, with flutes carved from bone accompanying rituals beneath stars that now shone upon permanent dwellings. Culture blossomed, not despite hardship, but alongside it, nurtured by the rhythm of settled life. And beneath all of this lay a deeper transformation. To settle was to begin a relationship with memory unlike anything before. In villages, the dead were buried not in forgotten places, but within the heart of the home, beneath thresholds and floors. Generations lived above the bones of those who had come before, their presence felt in every step. Memory ceased to be only oral, carried by story and song. It became physical, architectural, rooted in place. Settlement turned time itself into a layered presence, with past and present occupying the same ground. It is tempting to see this transition as inevitable, as the destined arc of human progress. Yet it was not. It was fragile, contested, fraught with failure. Crops withered, floods swept away villages, drought forced abandonment. Many settlements vanished as swiftly as they appeared, leaving behind only fragments of walls, shards of pottery, ghostly traces of hearths. What endured were not individual villages, but the idea of permanence, the conviction that humanity could root itself in the land and draw from it continuity. Thus, the first settlements marked more than a change of lifestyle. They marked a change of vision. For the first time, humanity dreamed of legacy, of futures bound to soil, of children inheriting not only stories, but walls, fields, and graves. The earth had always shaped human destiny, but now humanity sought to shape the earth in return. The gamble was immense, and its consequences would unfold across millennia, rippling outward into cities, kingdoms, and empires. But at its heart, it began with a single, radical question: what if we stay? And so, the first seeds took root, both in soil and in imagination. Fields spread across valleys, walls rose from mud, villages clung to riverbanks like clusters of fragile shells. The fire still burned, but now it burned in hearths that endured season after season. The rhythm of life, once written in ash and hunger, was rewritten in furrows of earth and cycles of rain. From these fragile beginnings, humanity would step into a new chapter, one that carried both promise and peril, abundance and loss, memory and ambition. It is here, in these first fragile settlements, that we see the earliest outlines of the world we recognize. Yet it is also here that the weight of permanence begins to press down, shaping destinies in ways both liberating and binding. The wanderers had become villagers, and in their choice to stay, they set in motion forces far greater than themselves. As the sun set over fields of ripening grain, the world itself seemed to pause, holding its breath for what was to come. From the fragile hearths of the first villages rose something far more audacious. To stay was one thing, to build was another. The moment human beings decided not only to plant, but to shape, not only to live, but to gather in numbers larger than kinship alone, the first cities were born. They did not emerge fully formed, with walls and palaces and temples standing against the horizon. They grew as rivers gathered strength, as trade carved pathways, as belief demanded monuments. Slowly, like coral reefs, cities rose, stone by stone, layer upon layer, until entire landscapes bore the imprint of human hands. Yet time is merciless, and many of these first cities now lie silent, half buried beneath dunes or swallowed by jungles. Their names echo faintly in records or myths, while others have vanished entirely, their memory carried only in the dust of ruins. To walk among them is to feel the presence of a story half erased, a story we are still learning to read. It was in the valleys of the great rivers that cities first dared to stand. Along the Tigris and Euphrates, clusters of villages drew together, their walls merging, their trade intertwining, their temples rising above flat plains. Uruk, one of the earliest and most legendary, became more than a settlement. It was a statement. Mud brick walls stretched for miles, enclosing markets, homes, and shrines. Within them, the first great ziggurats, stepped towers rising toward the heavens, declared humanity's new ambition, not merely to survive, not merely to endure, but to reach upward, to anchor themselves between earth and sky. The invention of writing in these same lands was no accident. Cities demanded memory larger than the mind. Grain had to be recorded, debts tracked, laws declared. What began as simple marks pressed into clay became cuneiform, the first script, a way of binding human thought into permanence. Where once memory had been carried only in song and story, now it was etched in tablets that could outlast their makers. With writing came history itself, and with history, the possibility of forgetting less, but also the haunting awareness of what might already be lost. To live in such cities was to live differently than ever before. Streets crowded with strangers, voices overlapping in dozens of tongues, markets humming with the trade of goods carried from distant valleys and mountains. Fish from the river, lapis from the east, timber floated down from highlands, grain stacked high in storage rooms. Each transaction bound lives together, knitting networks of dependence and rivalry. The individual was no longer just a member of a family or a band, but a citizen, part of something vast and complex, both liberating and confining. And yet, for every Uruk, every Memphis or Mohenjo-Daro, there were cities that left no clear name behind. In deserts, half-buried walls whisper of people who once gathered in numbers large enough to leave behind more than hearths. At Göbekli Tepe, long before cities as we imagine them, circles of carved stone pillars rose, decorated with animals and symbols whose meaning still eludes us. No houses have been found there, no evidence of permanent settlement, only monuments, raising questions about whether belief itself, the need to gather in ritual, may have been the seed that sprouted cities. Was it agriculture that gave rise to temples, or temples that gave rise to agriculture? The answer lies buried still, and perhaps it always will. The desert remembers differently. In Egypt, the Nile carved a line of green through endless sands, and along its banks, cities emerged like pearls. Memphis, Thebes, Abydos, each became not only a center of trade and governance, but a place where the living and the dead coexisted. The pyramids that still rise against the horizon are not only monuments of ambition, but symbols of permanence, an attempt to defy the shifting sands. Yet even here, beneath the gaze of stone giants, entire cities have vanished, swallowed by dust, their markets and homes reduced to foundations we only glimpse through excavation. In the Indus Valley, cities took on a different character. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa reveal streets laid with precision, drainage systems that spoke of planning, wells placed within homes to provide water for each family. These cities seem almost modern in their design, yet their language remains unread, their rulers unnamed, their gods unrecognized. When the rivers shifted and the climate hardened, the cities faded, leaving behind only bricks and silence. To stand there now is to feel the outline of an entire world, structured and vibrant, yet mute, as if the sand itself had drawn a curtain over memory. Far to the west, in the Mediterranean basin, other cities took root. Crete's palaces at Knossos, with their labyrinthine halls and painted frescoes, spoke of a people for whom art and architecture were inseparable. Legends of kings and monsters, of labyrinths and sacrifices, cling to these ruins, suggesting that myth itself may be one of the most enduring ways humanity remembers its first cities. For even when walls crumble and scripts are lost, stories linger, carried in whispers across centuries. The rise of cities was also the rise of inequality. In villages, survival was shared. In cities, power accumulated. Temples controlled grain, rulers commanded armies, wealth was gathered in storerooms while others labored in fields. With walls came hierarchy, and with hierarchy came conflict. To build a city was to build both possibility and peril, to create centers of culture and trade, but also targets for conquest and greed. Each city carried within its walls the seeds of its own downfall, and still, the deserts hold secrets. Throughout the Sahara, remnants of stone structures lie beneath shifting dunes, hinting at settlements from wetter ages, when the land bloomed with lakes and rivers. Were these places cities, villages, or ritual centers? Their stories remain half-hidden, waiting for archaeologists to uncover them, waiting for the winds to shift just enough to reveal more. The idea of lost cities haunts the human imagination because it reminds us that permanence is an illusion, that what feels eternal can vanish in a single drought, a single flood, a single invasion. To speak of forgotten cities is also to speak of myth. Atlantis, drowned beneath the sea, Wise, swallowed by waves off the coast of Brittany, lost Z deep in the Amazon, vanished Ubar, the city of pillars buried in Arabian sands. These stories blur the line between memory and imagination, yet they echo the truth that many cities have indeed disappeared, leaving behind only fragments. Were these myths born of faint recollections, or are they simply projections of our desire to believe that something magnificent still lies hidden beneath the earth? The answer may never be known, and that unknowing is part of the mystery itself. What unites all these cities, remembered or forgotten, is the audacity of their existence. To build with stone, to raise monuments, to carve streets and walls, was to declare a new relationship with the land. Humanity no longer merely adapted to the earth. It sought to shape it, to impose order on the chaos of rivers and deserts. Cities became the visible expression of imagination, faith, and ambition, reaching upward and outward in defiance of time. Yet time always wins. Walls collapse, streets vanish beneath sand, temples crumble into rubble. But each ruin whispers, and in that whisper, We hear the voices of those who once gathered in markets, prayed in temples, stored grain against famine, sang songs that rose into the night. To walk through a forgotten city is to feel those echoes pressing close, as though the stones themselves still remember. And so we leave this chapter at the edge of the desert, where a half-buried wall juts from the sand, a reminder of lives once lived. The sun sets red over dunes, the air still and heavy with silence. Somewhere beneath the surface lie streets, hearths, and perhaps the bones of those who once called this place home. The city is gone, but its presence lingers like a shadow. To stand here is to realize that our own cities, our own monuments, may one day be the same, forgotten, buried, waiting for strangers in some distant age to wonder who we were and why we built. Every civilization carries within its memory a shadow of catastrophe. To settle is to gamble with permanence, and the earth has never promised stability. Floods rose without warning. Fire rained from the sky. Mountains erupted in smoke and ash, and entire valleys were swept away in days. Across continents and centuries, the myths of floods and fires echo like refrains, stories of beginnings and endings, of punishment and renewal, of worlds destroyed so that new ones might emerge. Whether as legend or history, the refrain is the same. We were fragile before the forces of nature, and we remain so still. The flood is one of humanity's oldest memories. From Mesopotamia to India, from the Americas to Oceania, cultures recall waters that drowned lands, swallowed cities, and scattered survivors. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim recounts how the gods sent a deluge to erase humankind, sparing only those who built an ark. In the Hebrew Bible, Noah receives similar instructions, riding out the waters that cleansed the world. In Indian tradition, Manu is warned by a fish to build a boat against the rising flood. In Mesoamerican tales, floods washed away earlier creations of humanity, resetting the cosmic order. The Polynesians tell of islands disappearing beneath the waves, while the Aboriginal peoples of Australia remember seas encroaching upon sacred coasts. These stories span oceans and languages, yet their rhythm is unmistakably shared. Were they metaphors or memories? Science provides glimpses into what may have birthed them. At the end of the last ice age, some 12,000 years ago, glaciers melted with staggering speed. The Younger Dryas period brought abrupt climate swings. Rivers surged, coastlines redrew themselves, sea levels rose by hundreds of feet, swallowing land bridges and shorelines where countless communities must have lived. Imagine standing on a coast where your ancestors had fished for generations, only to watch the ocean climb inexorably higher each season, claiming fields, hearths, and graves. The loss would have seemed apocalyptic, and memory, shaped into myth, would ensure the story was not forgotten. The Black Sea may have once been a freshwater lake before the Mediterranean spilled into it, drowning entire landscapes beneath brackish tides. In North America, glacial lakes once dammed by ice suddenly burst, releasing torrents that carved canyons and reshaped rivers in days. Across the globe, tsunamis triggered by undersea quakes or landslides obliterated coastlines. Even volcanic eruptions, like the explosion of Thera in the Aegean, which sent waves across the Mediterranean, would have felt like divine wrath. Each of these events carved scars not only into the earth, but into memory, carried forward as stories of divine judgment or cosmic renewal. If the flood is humanity's most enduring myth of water, then fire is its twin, an element equally creative and destructive, feared and revered. Fire was the first tool to tame the night, the first companion against cold and predators. Yet when unleashed in the form of wildfire, volcanic eruption, or fire from the sky, it became terror incarnate. Myths of fire rain are just as widespread as those of the flood. Peoples from the Andes to Mesopotamia told of burning skies, of suns too close, of flames that devoured entire generations. Volcanoes were the most visible source of this terror. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE froze Pompeii and Herculaneum beneath ash, preserving not only bodies but gestures, as though time itself had stopped. But this was far from the only eruption to shape memory. Long before, eruptions like Toba in Indonesia, some 75,000 years ago, may have darkened skies for years, causing famine and nearly extinguishing humanity. Whether or not the Toba catastrophe bottleneck nearly ended our species, it remains a reminder of how small we are beneath mountains that breathe fire. In Iceland, in the Pacific, in the Andes, whole communities were swallowed by flows of molten rock and ash. For survivors, such destruction could only be interpreted as cosmic, the anger of gods, or the judgment of the earth itself. Yet fire also fell from the heavens. Meteors scarred the earth with sudden violence, leaving craters that gape like open wounds. The Tunguska event of 1908 flattened forests across Siberia, a small reminder of the far larger impacts that had occurred deep in prehistory. The Chicxulub impact, 66 million years ago, extinguished the dinosaurs and cleared the stage for mammals to rise. Did smaller impacts in human memory spark myths of fire from the sky? Ancient petroglyphs depict blazing objects falling toward the earth, while oral traditions across continents speak of stars that became deadly, streaking down to ignite forests or seas. For those who witnessed even a fragment of such a fall, the experience would have been seared into cultural memory. The flood and the fire together form humanity's great narrative of endings and beginnings. Water cleanses, fire purifies, both destroy, and yet both prepare the ground for renewal. Myths often frame them as judgments, resets demanded by divine order when humanity strays. Yet even without gods, the earth itself resets, its cycles of climate and catastrophe indifferent to human ambition. Cities that once flourished can be undone in days, as if brushed aside by an unseen hand. This fragility is part of our inheritance, and part of what shaped the human imagination into something both fearful and resilient. What is striking is not only the ubiquity of these myths, but their persistence. Why should stories of ancient floods and fires survive across thousands of years, passed from tongue to tongue, reshaped but never forgotten? Perhaps because they remind us of the precariousness of existence. Perhaps because they anchor memory in awe, ensuring survival knowledge is never lost. A story of a flood may teach future generations to respect rivers, to fear the sea, to build boats, to seek higher ground. A story of fire may warn against the mountains, against the wrath of the skies, against forgetting how quickly life can be undone. In myth, practicality and poetry intertwine, preserving both fear and instruction. Archaeology uncovers evidence, but myth provides context. When we find drowned cities beneath the sea, like those off the coasts of India, Japan, or the Mediterranean, we are reminded that the flood was no mere story. When we see charred layers of ash across ancient strata, we realize fire did indeed fall, again and again. Each myth is not simply fantasy, but a lens, refracting fragments of truth into something memorable enough to endure. Myths exaggerate, they reshape, they simplify, but within them lies the core of lived experience. And so, we stand today surrounded by monuments to both flood and fire, temples built on high ground, ziggurats rising above plains, pyramids reaching for the sky. Each may be read not only as a gesture of ambition, but as insurance against catastrophe, attempts to place human effort above the reach of water or flame. Even in our own age, we build seawalls and towers, satellites and bunkers, repeating the same gestures in new forms. Yet the flood still comes, the fire still falls, and humanity remains caught between awe and fear, between memory and myth. To remember these stories is to remember humility. For all our mastery of steel and concrete, we are still vulnerable to the same forces that shaped our ancestors' myths. Seas are rising once again, fires sweep across continents, volcanoes murmur beneath their crusts, and the sky above still carries stones capable of reshaping worlds. Perhaps this is why the old myths resonate so deeply. They remind us that we are part of a cycle much larger than ourselves, a cycle of destruction and renewal that binds us to the earth. As the chapter closes, imagine a storyteller in an ancient village standing by the fire, children gathered close, the dark pressing in around them. His voice tells of waters that rose higher than mountains, of fires that rained from the sky, of gods who punished and then forgave. Outside, the river glimmers in the moonlight, and beyond it, the mountains brood in silence. The children listen, wide-eyed, carrying the story into memory, into adulthood, into generations yet unborn. Whether or not the events happened as told does not matter. What matters is the lesson, the echo of awe and fear that ensures they will never forget. For most of our journey across deep time, we were not alone. The human story has often been told as if Homo sapiens walked a solitary path, a singular chosen species destined to rise above the wilderness. Yet this is only one version of the truth. For countless generations, we shared the earth with others, kin who were not us, yet not entirely other. They built fires, they buried their dead, they crafted tools, they may have sung beneath the stars. These were our lost companions, the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, the Flores, hobbits, and others whose names are only now emerging from the silence of bones. Their presence lingers like ghosts in our blood, reminding us that humanity was once a chorus, not a solo voice. The Neanderthals are the most familiar of these shadows, though familiarity is tinged with distortion. For centuries, they were painted as brutish, stooped, dim-witted beings, creatures who deserved extinction. Yet the bones tell a different story. Broad-shouldered and powerful, Neanderthals thrived across Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, enduring ice ages that would have broken us. They mastered fire, hunted with skill, crafted tools as finely made as our own. In caves at Shanidar, in Iraq, flowers were placed upon their dead, suggesting a tenderness that defies the caricature of savagery. To live alongside them was to share the world with a species as human as we are, though shaped by a different rhythm of survival. The Denisovans are less known, yet their legacy is written within us. Discovered not by entire skeletons, but by fragments, a finger bone, a tooth, scraps of DNA, they reveal a lineage spread across Asia, mingling with both Neanderthals and sapiens. Their genetic traces endure in modern populations of Melanesia and Tibet, where adaptations to high altitude may have been gifts from Denisovan blood. Though their faces remain unknown, their presence is undeniable, woven into our very capacity to endure. They were companions not remembered by story, but preserved in our cells, a silent inheritance from encounters lost to time. And then there are the smaller kin, like Homo floresiensis, discovered on the Indonesian island of Flores. Barely over a meter tall, with brains smaller than ours, they nevertheless crafted tools and hunted on their island for tens of thousands of years. Nicknamed hobbits, they force us to reconsider what intelligence and survival mean. Were they extinguished by us, by climate, or by isolation? Their bones suggest a parallel humanity, one that lived in miniature worlds, yet carried the same spark of endurance. To imagine them moving through the forests, tending fires on tropical nights, is to imagine an alternate path, a reminder that human diversity once stretched far beyond the boundaries of our present. Other companions are emerging from shadows still deeper. Homo naledi, found in South African caves, reveals a species that may have buried their dead in darkness, their small brains challenging assumptions about the limits of cognition. Homo luzonensis, found in the Philippines, hints at another lineage, another voice in the chorus, surviving until surprisingly recent times. Each new discovery pushes the boundaries of what we thought we knew, reminding us that our story is less a straight line than a branching river, with many tributaries lost before they reach the sea. What happened to these companions? The question lingers, unanswered. Some suggest competition, that Homo sapiens, with greater adaptability, broader social networks, and more efficient tools, simply outcompeted them for resources. Others argue that climate shifts narrowed habitats, forcing extinctions regardless of rivalry. But the bones and the DNA suggest something more complex. We did not simply replace them. We mingled. We loved. We raised children together. The fact that their genetic signatures endure in our blood is proof of intimacy, of bonds forged beyond rivalry. Extinction was not absolute erasure, but absorption, a folding of voices into our own. And yet, extinction did come. Neanderthals vanished around 40,000 years ago, leaving behind caves that once glowed with their fires. The Denisovans disappeared into mystery, their remnants scattered and sparse. The hobbits of Flores are gone, their tools lying abandoned in caves that still echo with bats. Each extinction is a silence, a note cut short in the symphony of humanity. We remain, but their absence lingers, haunting the edges of our imagination. What songs might they have sung? What stories might they have told, had their voices endured? Their loss reshaped us, for in their absence, Homo sapiens became truly alone, a solitary species bearing the weight of memory for all who came before. Yet we are not untouched by them. Our immune systems carry Neanderthal defenses. Our endurance at high altitude whispers of Denisovan legacy. Perhaps even the spark of creativity that carried us into art and myth was sharpened in the presence of rivals who were also kin, driving us to distinguish ourselves, to innovate, to imagine more fiercely. In this sense, their disappearance shaped not only our past, but our destiny. But what if the silence is not complete? Across cultures, myths whisper of others, wild men of the forest, small people who vanish into caves, shadowy figures who walk at night. The orang pendek of Sumatra, the yeti of the Himalayas, the almas of Central Asia. These stories, dismissed as fantasy, may yet echo faint memories of encounters with other hominins. Could it be that fragments of those lost companions survived longer than we thought, lingering in isolated valleys, blending into the fabric of myth? Science offers no proof, but the persistence of such tales suggests something deeper in human memory, a refusal to fully let go of kin who once shared the fire. The poignancy of their loss lies not only in what we know, but in what we will never know. What did Neanderthal laughter sound like? What gods did Denisovans worship, if any? Did the Flores hobbits weave stories around their fires, telling children of spirits in the forest? The silence is almost unbearable, because it reminds us of how fragile knowledge is. A single broken lineage can erase an entire world of memory, leaving behind only bones and traces of DNA. We are left with questions that can never be answered, mysteries that hover at the edge of science and imagination. Yet perhaps this is the gift they left us. To know that we were not alone is to know that humanity is not singular, not inevitable. We are not the sole measure of what it means to be human. We are only one surviving branch. In that awareness lies humility, and with humility, wonder. Our lost companions remind us that survival is precarious, that dominance is temporary, that intelligence and creativity are not our exclusive inheritance, but a shared spark. Their echoes in our blood mean we carry them still, even if their fires have gone out. And so, as we look back upon the flood and the fire, upon the cities buried in sand, upon the first seeds sown in soil, we also feel the presence of those who once walked beside us. They are gone, but they are not entirely lost. In our stories, in our genes, in the myths of wild men and hidden kin, they remain. To remember them is to remember that humanity is plural, that our story is one of companionship as much as isolation. As this chapter closes, imagine a Neanderthal child and a Sapiens child sitting together by the fire, watching sparks rise into the night. They do not know of extinction or survival, of rivalry or inheritance. They only know the warmth of flame, the comfort of presence, the shared wonder of stars above. That moment, fragile and fleeting, is the heart of what we lost, and the heart of what we carry forward still. There comes a moment, standing before the ruins of forgotten cities or peering into the darkness of caves painted 30 millennia ago, when a strange question rises. What if there were worlds before this one? What if the civilizations we study and the histories we record are only fragments of a far deeper story, one whose earlier chapters have been erased by water, by fire, by the simple attrition of time? To wonder this is not to abandon science, but to acknowledge its silences. Archaeology gives us evidence, but between its fragments lies vast space for imagination, myth, and speculation. In that space, we confront the haunting possibility that humanity's story may not be as linear or as complete as we think. Legends across the globe whisper of golden ages that ended in catastrophe. Plato spoke of Atlantis, a mighty civilization swallowed by the sea, whose ships and temples vanished in a single night. The Greeks told of successive ages of mankind, the golden, silver, bronze, and iron, each more corrupt, each ending in ruin. Hindu cosmology speaks of great cycles, the yugas, in which worlds are created, destroyed, and remade. The Maya envisioned suns that rose and fell across eras, each age extinguished in flood, fire, or earthquake. Aboriginal Australian songlines carry echoes of lands drowned by seas long ago. Again and again, across cultures unconnected by geography, the refrain is the same. There was something before us, and it ended. Skeptics dismiss these as metaphors, allegories for morality, or echoes of known disasters like the Younger Dryas floods. But what if the persistence of these myths points to a deeper memory? We know that sea levels rose dramatically at the end of the last ice age, swallowing vast coastlines. Entire landscapes where people once dwelled are now beneath the waves, unreachable, but not unimaginable. Could some of these places have been more than simple camps and villages? Could they have been settlements whose memory survived in story long after their stones were drowned? Fragments tease us. Off the coast of India, near Dwarka, structures lie submerged, their patterns suggestive of walls and streets. Off Japan, at Yonaguni, strange terraces and steps descend beneath the sea, sparking endless debate. Are they natural formations or the work of hands long forgotten? In the Mediterranean, legends of drowned lands echo from Sardinia to Spain, from Crete to the Pillars of Hercules. Each discovery tempts us with possibility. Each silence warns us against certainty. The ocean guards its secrets well, and most of humanity's early coastal settlements now lie hundreds of feet beneath its surface. Even on land, enigmas abound. Megalithic sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey challenge our timelines. 10,000 years before the pyramids, people carved towering pillars decorated with animals and symbols, erecting monumental architecture long before agriculture was fully established. Who were these builders, and how did they gather the knowledge and labor for such a feat? Were they remnants of an earlier tradition, carrying forward techniques lost elsewhere? Or were they simply one extraordinary community whose vision outpaced its era? The site leaves us with more questions than answers, suggesting that memory stretches further back than we once dared to imagine. There are whispers, too, of technological riddles, stone blocks cut and moved with a precision that challenges modern tools, astronomical alignments so exact they suggest knowledge of cycles spanning thousands of years. At places like Pumapunku in Bolivia, at Baalbek in Lebanon, at the great trilithons of Stonehenge, we see the imprint of ambition that seems to reach beyond mere survival. Did these monuments arise in isolation, or do they hint at a wider web of lost knowledge, fragments of which survive in scattered stones across continents? To ask these questions is not to leap into fantasy, but to recognize the humility of our position. Archaeology is young. The earth is old. Entire civilizations could rise and fall within the span of 10,000 years and leave only the faintest trace, swallowed by forest, desert, or sea. Even our own world, with its steel and concrete, would vanish shockingly quickly if abandoned. Within a few centuries, cities would crumble. Within millennia, their remnants would be hard to distinguish from natural stone. How much, then, might have already vanished in the hundreds of thousands of years before what we call history? And yet, myth may carry what ruins cannot. Perhaps Atlantis was not a literal island empire, but a memory of rising seas. Perhaps the Golden Ages were allegories for times of abundance, shattered by drought or volcanic eruption. Perhaps the yugas and cosmic cycles are poetic ways of encoding natural rhythms, the tilt of the earth, the precession of the stars, the waxing and waning of climates. To interpret myth as memory is not to mistake story for fact, but to recognize that human beings preserve knowledge in more ways than one. Still, the allure of forgotten civilizations endures because it touches something deeper. It is not only about ruins or artifacts, it is about humility and wonder. If others came before us and were lost, then our own permanence is called into question. If time resets, if worlds vanish and are remade, then our age is not unique, but only the latest page in an endless cycle. Such thoughts are sobering, yet they also connect us to something vast, something cosmic. We are not the pinnacle, but a moment, and in that realization lies both fragility and awe. Science offers cautious possibilities. Genetic evidence suggests that humans nearly went extinct more than once, bottlenecked to small populations by climate shifts or disasters. Could entire lineages, entire cultures, have perished in those bottlenecks, their memory carried only in stories? Geological records show catastrophic floods, volcanic winters, sudden droughts. Each of these could erase centuries of progress, scattering survivors who carried only fragments of memory. To rebuild, they would need to begin again, carrying with them myths of what once was. Perhaps the very idea of lost golden ages is not fantasy at all, but memory of cycles of rise and fall stretching back beyond what we can yet see. Standing before the ruins of Göbekli Tepe, or gazing out across the drowned plains of Doggerland, once dry land connecting Britain to Europe, it is difficult not to feel the pull of these questions. How many villages, how many shrines, how many small experiments in civilization now lie beneath waves or soil? How many names have been lost? How many languages silenced before they were ever recorded? The earth does not keep archives. It erases as much as it preserves, leaving us with fragments that tempt us into imagining the whole. Perhaps that is the true gift of the idea of civilizations before time. They remind us to be humble, to resist the temptation of certainty. We are creatures of story as much as stone, and the gaps in our knowledge invite us to wonder. Myth and archaeology may never fully align, but together they create a richer picture, one that acknowledges both evidence and imagination. In that blend lies the truth of what it means to be human, to seek, to question, to remember, and to dream. As the fire of this chapter fades, imagine standing at the edge of a sea that has claimed its coast. Beneath the waves lie shapes you cannot quite name, stones arranged in patterns, lines that seem too straight, corners too deliberate. The tide covers them once more, and you are left with the haunting suspicion that something was there, something lost, something older than history itself, time before time. The thought lingers, unsettling and wondrous, as the waves whisper against the shore. Long before telescopes swept the heavens, before satellites traced orbits and clocks measured seconds with atomic precision, humanity looked upward and found in the sky a map. The night was not silent. It spoke through the slow procession of stars, the waxing and waning of the moon, the return of constellations that announced the turning of seasons. For those who had planted seeds, for those who had built villages along rivers, for those who watched anxiously for floods or drought, the heavens became an oracle. And so they built not only fields and walls, but monuments aligned with the cosmos, stone markers that still stand as witnesses to an ancient dialogue between earth and sky. At first glance, these structures appear simple: circles of stone, mounds of earth, lines carved into desert plains. Yet their precision defies chance. Stonehenge, rising from the Salisbury Plain, is aligned so that the sun on the solstice pierces its stones with exactness. Newgrange, in Ireland, built 5,000 years ago, channels a shaft of sunlight directly into its inner chamber at the winter solstice, illuminating spirals carved into stone that had waited all year in darkness. Across the ocean, the Great Serpent Mound of Ohio coils in a vast spiral, its head aligned with solstice sunsets. In the Andes, at Machu Picchu and at earlier sites, windows and sight lines capture solar events with breathtaking clarity. On nearly every continent, the story repeats: monuments that root human life to the rhythms of the heavens. Why this obsession with the sky? Because the heavens were more than beauty. They were necessity. The stars revealed when to plant and when to harvest. The moon's cycle guided tides and migrations. The solstice marked the sun's return or decline, carrying with it the promise of renewal or the fear of darkness. By building monuments aligned to these cycles, our ancestors anchored themselves to something larger, ensuring that memory would not fade. A monument was not only stone but calendar, not only ritual but survival encoded in architecture. The precision is staggering. At Nabta Playa, in the Egyptian desert, stone circles aligned with Orion's belt and the summer solstice were erected thousands of years before the pyramids. In Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, petroglyphs carved into rock catch a dagger of sunlight during solstices and equinoxes, marking celestial events with artistry and patience. The Maya built entire cities as living calendars, their pyramids echoing cosmic cycles in shadow and stone. At Chichen Itza, the serpent carved upon the pyramid descends in light and shadow during the equinox, a cosmic drama played out for centuries. These alignments were not accidents. They required generations of observation, careful construction, and a worldview in which humanity was woven into the fabric of the cosmos. There is humility in this orientation. Unlike the modern mind that often seeks to dominate nature, ancient builders sought to harmonize with it. A temple was not merely a place of worship, but a point of alignment, a bridge between earth and sky, between the fleeting rhythms of human life and the vast, enduring cycles of the universe. To enter such a monument was to step into cosmic order, to feel oneself as part of a pattern stretching beyond mortality. Yet there is also mystery. Why should pre-literate societies devote such immense labor to aligning stones with stars? Survival alone cannot explain the grandeur. The effort suggests not only practical calendars, but also belief that the sky was alive, that gods or ancestors dwelled among the stars, that to align with them was to secure favor or harmony. Myths across cultures confirm this. The Egyptians saw Osiris in Orion, Isis in Sirius, their cycles mirroring the flooding of the Nile. The Polynesians navigated oceans by constellations, their canoes guided by star paths preserved in chant. The Greeks wove gods into constellations, binding myth to the heavens. The Maya encoded entire cosmologies into their sky watching, linking celestial cycles to kingship and sacrifice. The heavens were both science and story, practical guide and eternal text. Some suggest that these alignments hint at knowledge older than we assume, fragments of a deeper tradition. Could careful star charts, precise enough to predict eclipses or track precession, be remnants of a long lineage of observation reaching back into forgotten eras? Or are they simply the natural result of generations of patient watching, human curiosity sharpened by necessity? The line between speculation and evidence is fine, but either way, the result is awe. Stone bound to sky, architecture woven into eternity. There are puzzles that linger. Why do so many monuments across continents align to Orion, to the Pleiades, to solstices? Is it coincidence? Or does it reveal a universal fascination with certain celestial markers, perhaps because they were the most visible, the most reliable, the most resonant? The Pleiades, small and faint, appear in myths from Greece to Japan to the Americas, often associated with beginnings, fertility, or timekeeping. Did ancient peoples, separated by oceans, converge upon the same stars by necessity, or does this convergence suggest some deeper echo in human consciousness? We may never know, but the recurrence itself feels like a cosmic signature. To stand within these places today is to feel a connection across millennia. At Stonehenge, as dawn breaks on the solstice and light pierces through the ancient stones, modern crowds gather, echoing rituals long vanished. At Newgrange, the solstice light floods a chamber sealed for nearly the entire year, and one feels the breath of ancestors who must have gasped at the same sight. At Chichen Itza, the serpent of shadow descends, and the line between myth and architecture blurs. In these moments, time collapses, and we are reminded that our ancestors were not primitive, but profound. Observers, architects, dreamers who sought to root themselves in eternity. The cosmic perspective is not only ancient, it is enduring. Today, we track planets with machines, map galaxies with satellites, calculate cycles with precision beyond imagination. Yet the impulse is the same. We still look upward and wonder. We still align our lives with cosmic rhythms, whether in calendars, festivals, or in the awe we feel beneath a star-filled sky. The monuments remind us that this wonder is ancient, that long before science, there was reverence, and long before telescopes, there was memory etched in stone. And perhaps that is why these alignments endure. They are not only records of observation, but reminders of belonging. The sky was not something separate, but something shared, binding every person who ever looked upward. The same stars that guided a Sumerian farmer, a Polynesian navigator, a Maya priest, guide us still. In that continuity lies something transcendent, a recognition that across time and space, humanity has always sought to place itself within a greater pattern. As this chapter closes, imagine standing in a field at dawn, watching the first light of the solstice sun pierce a line of stones set in place thousands of years ago. The air is cold, the world hushed. For a moment, you feel yourself connected not only to those who built the monument, but to every person who has ever watched the heavens with wonder. The stars, the sun, the moon, they are the same, eternal companions in a world that is never still. Stone and sky speak to one another, and through them, to us. If the heavens invited humanity to look upward, to seek alignment with the stars and the cycles of light, the earth beneath our feet pulled us downward into its darkness. For as long as we have dwelled upon the surface, the ground below has been a place of mystery, of burial, of silence. It holds within its layers the memory of worlds long vanished, yet it reveals those memories only grudgingly, fragment by fragment, as though reluctant to give up its secrets. To dig is to disturb the guardianship of time itself, and what is found is rarely the whole story, only pieces, scattered clues to lives and worlds erased. The earth is a vast archive. Every layer of soil, every stratum of rock, is a page in a book written not in words, but in fossils, artifacts, ash, and bone. To read it requires patience and humility, for the text is incomplete, broken by erosion, compressed by pressure, rewritten by fire and flood. Yet even in fragments, it speaks. In caves, sealed chambers preserve footprints of children who once ran laughing across wet floors, their joy frozen for 40,000 years. In peat bogs, bodies lie preserved with hair and skin intact, their faces still bearing expressions of anguish or peace. In the frozen ground of Siberia, mammoths emerge with flesh so whole that grass remains between their teeth, as if death had only just arrived. The silence beneath the earth is deceptive. It is filled with voices, waiting for us to listen. Caves are perhaps the most intimate of these silences. They were shelters, sanctuaries, and cathedrals of early humanity. In the dark, paintings bloom across walls, bison thundering, horses galloping, handprints layered in red and black. Some chambers are so deep that reaching them requires crawling through narrow passages by torchlight, raising the question of why anyone would make the journey. What compelled them to paint where few eyes would ever see? Were these acts of ritual, of communion with spirits, or of art for its own sake? We cannot know. But in the flicker of flame, in the echo of dripping water, we sense the reverence of those who entered. The earth was not empty. It was alive, filled with presence. Beneath villages and cities, the earth became a place of burial, a bridge between life and death. At Çatalhöyük, the dead were placed beneath floors, woven into the very foundations of daily life. At Varna, in Bulgaria, graves from 7,000 years ago reveal gold ornaments placed with care upon bodies, suggesting both reverence and hierarchy. Across continents, tombs and barrows rise, their interiors aligned with solstices or constellations, as if death itself was woven into cosmic order. To descend into these chambers is to enter a liminal space where silence thickens, where the weight of time presses close. The earth cradles the dead, but it also preserves memory, layering stories into soil. Sometimes the earth's silence is catastrophic. Volcanic ash blankets entire cities, as at Pompeii, freezing gestures of daily life in grotesque detail. Earthquakes swallow temples whole, leaving only fractured columns jutting at odd angles. Landslides bury villages. Floods deposit silt that conceals entire landscapes for millennia. The destruction is merciless, yet in its violence, the earth preserves. Without the ash of Vesuvius, we would not know the faces of Pompeii. Without the ice of Siberia, the mammoth's body would have rotted into oblivion. Preservation is often born of catastrophe, as if the earth guards its secrets most jealously in moments of terror. Archaeology is a dialogue with this silence, but it is never a full conversation. We uncover shards of pottery, tools chipped from flint, beads carved from bone. We find skeletons, sometimes whole, sometimes broken. Yet what is lost is always greater than what remains. For every artifact uncovered, countless others are ground into dust. Entire languages have vanished without inscription, entire myths lost without record. The earth erases as much as it preserves, and so we are left with fragments, shadows of what once was. To reconstruct whole lives from a handful of objects is like trying to rebuild a symphony from a few scattered notes. And yet we try, because even fragments are enough to remind us of the vastness of what we do not know. There is also unease in the earth's silence. To dig is to disturb, to unearth bones that were laid to rest in trust of eternity. Ancient peoples understood this. Many traditions warn against disturbing graves, against desecrating what lies beneath. Even today, archaeologists debate the ethics of excavation, the balance between knowledge and respect. The silence of the earth is not only physical, it is sacred. The soil is not simply archive, but sanctum, and to enter it is to step into a covenant with the dead. Yet the silence is not complete. Sometimes the earth speaks more clearly, almost uncannily. The discovery of Ötzi the Iceman, preserved for over 5,000 years in the Alps, revealed tattoos upon his skin, tools by his side, an arrow still lodged in his body. His final moments could be reconstructed in astonishing detail, as if time itself had conspired to grant us a window. Other times, entire civilizations emerge from the soil, their streets intact, their frescoes vibrant. At Akrotiri in Santorini, a volcanic eruption entombed a Bronze Age city so completely that its rooms, stairways, and vessels look as though the inhabitants had only just fled. To walk there is to feel the past, almost breathing, the silence whispering directly into our ears. But the earth does not give up all its secrets willingly. Beneath deserts lie ruins swallowed by sand, their outlines detectable only from the sky. Beneath jungles, temples slumber under roots, their stones locked in an embrace with vegetation. Beneath oceans lie coastlines where people once lived, now drowned and unreachable. What lies beneath may be more vast than what lies above, and so the silence is not absence but abundance, an abundance too immense for us to ever fully uncover. And what of what lies deeper still? Beneath the reach of archaeology, the geological record stretches back billions of years. Within it are scars of extinctions, layers of ash, traces of ancient atmospheres. To study them is to realize how many worlds have risen and fallen upon this planet, long before humanity ever set foot upon it. The earth holds not only our memory, but the memory of all life, inscribed in stone with relentless patience. We are but the most recent addition to its vast library. Perhaps that is the most humbling truth of the silence beneath the earth. It reminds us that we are temporary. One day, our cities too will fall. Our bones will rest beneath soil. Our artifacts will scatter into fragments. Perhaps some future mind will dig, puzzled by what it finds, trying to reconstruct who we were. What will they see? Towers of steel reduced to rust, plastics transformed into strange new strata, bones buried beneath collapsing foundations. Will we be remembered clearly, or will we too be reduced to whispers, fragments, unanswered questions? The earth does not hurry. It will hold what it chooses, erase what it chooses, and speak only in fragments. To walk upon it is to tread upon an archive older than memory, more patient than myth. The silence beneath our feet is not empty. It is heavy with the weight of time. Every stone, every grain of sand carries stories too vast for us to comprehend. We listen, but we only hear echoes. As this chapter closes, imagine standing at the mouth of a cave, torch in hand. The light flickers against walls where hands once pressed pigment, where echoes once carried chants into the dark. Behind you lies the world of sunlight and seasons. Before you lies silence deep and unbroken. You step forward, and the earth swallows your sound. The silence is not absence but presence, dense, watchful, eternal. It is here that memory sleeps, waiting for us to ask, to wonder, to listen. Every story we have told so far, of ash and hunger, of shifting lands, of the first villages, the lost cities, the floods and fires, the companions we no longer walk beside, the myths of ages erased, the monuments aligned to stars, the silence beneath the earth, has pointed us toward one inescapable realization. We are not permanent. We are a moment in a long chain of moments, a single flame flickering briefly in the immense darkness of time. And yet, in that briefness, we dream of eternity. The riddle of tomorrow lies not in whether we will endure, but in how we will be remembered, and what trace of our existence will remain when the earth has once again rewritten itself. The Anthropocene, the age of human impact, is unlike any that came before. Never has a species reshaped the surface of the earth so rapidly, altering rivers, cutting forests, scattering mountains, pouring steel and glass into the sky. Never has a species so completely bent the rhythms of the planet to its will. Yet never has a species stood so precariously upon the edge of its own undoing. For all our mastery, we are still bound to the same cycles of climate, catastrophe, and fragility that ended countless worlds before ours. Tomorrow is a question that hangs above us, vast and unanswered. Look at our cities from above, grids of light, towers of steel, sprawling webs of concrete. They seem eternal, indestructible, monuments to permanence. But if time has taught us anything, it is that permanence is an illusion. Within centuries of abandonment, nature would reclaim them. Vines climbing walls, rivers breaking dams, seas advancing over streets. Within millennia, their remnants would be buried, their outlines faint as whispers. Within tens of millennia, they might be erased almost entirely, leaving behind only scattered traces, just as the ruins of past civilizations lie half-forgotten beneath deserts and jungles. We imagine ourselves immune to time, yet the earth is patient, and patience is always greater than ambition. Perhaps what will endure is not the skyscraper, but the plastic fragment, the radioactive isotope, the subtle shift in the planet's chemistry that carries our fingerprint. These will be our fossils, our legacy written not in marble, but in molecules. Future minds, human or otherwise, may puzzle over these traces as we puzzle over megaliths, asking, who were they, and why did they build, and why did they vanish? The silence of the earth will preserve only what it chooses, and what it chooses may not flatter us. Yet humanity has always responded to fragility with imagination. Faced with hunger, we painted caves. Faced with rivers that rose and deserts that spread, we built villages. Faced with uncertainty, we raised cities, carved monuments, told myths that bound us to eternity. And now, faced with tomorrow's uncertainty, we look again to imagination, not only in the stories we tell, but in the technologies we create, in the worlds we envision beyond this one. Space has become the new horizon. The stars once measured for planting, now measured for possibility. The same constellations that guided ancient farmers now guide probes across the solar system. The question is no longer whether we belong to the Earth alone, but whether tomorrow's chapter will unfold beyond it. Speculation stretches wide. Could humanity survive a new flood, a new fire, a new cycle of extinction? Could we become not just survivors, but architects of our own continuity, carrying memory into the cosmos? Or are we, like the Neanderthals and Denisovans, destined to vanish, leaving behind only fragments for some future discoverer to ponder? The riddle of tomorrow is that we cannot know. But in that unknowing lies the same wonder that has always carried us forward. What is certain is that tomorrow will judge us by how we live today. If time resets, if civilizations fall and rise, if floods reclaim coastlines and fires darken skies, then what matters is not whether we can prevent all loss, but whether we can pass on enough knowledge, enough memory, enough compassion to allow another beginning. Our ancestors did this for us. They left handprints on cave walls, monuments aligned to stars, stories of floods and fires, myths of golden ages. They gave us fragments of their memory, and with those fragments we built. What fragments will we leave for those who come after us? There is humility in this recognition, but also a strange comfort. We are not the first to face uncertainty, nor will we be the last. The Paleolithic hunter staring into darkness, the farmer watching clouds over parched fields, the priest watching the sun climb through temple gates. All of them lived with the same awareness. Tomorrow is not promised, yet all of them still built, still dreamed, still reached for meaning. The riddle of tomorrow is not one of survival alone, but of purpose. What do we build, knowing it may not last? What do we dream, knowing it may never be fulfilled? Perhaps the answer lies not in permanence, but in continuity. The earth may reset, civilizations may fall, but each reset carries forward fragments, genetic, cultural, mythic, that seed the next age. We are part of that pattern, no more and no less. To accept this is to accept both our smallness and our greatness, our fragility and our resilience. Tomorrow does not belong to us alone. It belongs to all who may follow, shaped by the fragments we leave behind. As the arc of this story bends toward its close, imagine standing at twilight on the shore of an ancient sea. The waves lap softly against sand, where once villages stood, where once mammoths roamed, where once children played. Behind you rise the ruins of a city, its stones half buried, its towers fallen. Above you, the stars shine, the same stars seen by those children, by those villagers, by those hunters in the deep past. The sea whispers, the stars watch, the earth waits. In that moment, you understand. Tomorrow is a riddle, but it is also an invitation. For we are not only the inheritors of memory, we are its guardians, its transmitters, its storytellers. If the flood comes, if the fire falls, if the earth reshapes itself again, it will be story that endures. Story has always endured. From handprints on cave walls to myths of drowned lands, from ziggurats aligned to stars to ruins hidden beneath sand, story has carried humanity through cycles of rise and fall. Tomorrow, too, will be carried by story. Our story, your story, stories not yet imagined. And so the final image is not of an ending, but of a fire in darkness. A circle of people gathered, their faces lit by flame, their voices rising into the night. They tell of floods and fires, of lost companions, of stars that guide and earth that remembers. They tell of tomorrow, though they cannot know it. The fire crackles, sparks rise, and the story continues, passed from one voice to another, one age to another, one tomorrow to the next. The riddle of tomorrow is that it will always come, whether we are here to witness it or not. But for as long as the fire burns, for as long as stories are told, we will endure in fragments, in whispers, in echoes. And perhaps that is enough.